Welcome to BBC News, broadcasting to viewers in North America and around the globe. My name is Nkemi Fejika, and these are our top stories. American officials say they believe at least 40 people have been killed in what appears to be a chemical weapons attack in Syria. Brazil's former president Lula ends a 2-day standoff and surrenders to police. He's due to start a 12-year prison sentence for corruption. Hello and welcome to the program. The U.S. State Department says it's monitoring disturbing reports of a chemical weapons attack in the rebel-held district of Eastern Ghouta in Syria. Just to warn you, the pictures we're about to show are distressing. Now, the White Helmets say that at least 40 people have been killed and hundreds injured. Women and children are among the dead. Earlier, the volunteer group said that 150 people had been killed. The Syrian government has denied carrying out any such attack. The U.S. State Department says the regime's history of using chemical weapons against its own people is not in dispute, and that Russia ultimately bears responsibility for the brutal targeting of countless civilians with chemical weapons. Well, earlier I spoke to Ahmed Tarakji, who is president of the Syrian American Medical Society. SAMS is a medical relief organization that works on the front lines of crisis relief in Syria. Its staff have been dealing with victims of the attack in Douma.
At this time, I want to start with the casualties that we received inside the hospitals. We received, since the evening time in Damascus, we received many patients who suffered from symptoms compatible with exposure to chlorine gas, high concentration chlorine gas. But as time went on, we noticed that 6 people died as they are in the hospital. And their death actually is not only explained by the limited resources, but also their symptoms were deteriorating in a fashion that's not compatible with pure chlorine gas exposure. And that's why our physicians are concerned about exposure to nerve gas in low concentration. That is being reviewed right now by our experts. In addition to that, we had about 4 children whose clinical condition had deteriorated while they are in the hospital. And they are also under, critical care condition and intensive care unit support at this time. Unfortunately, with the evacuation casualties and deliberate targeting of medical facilities in Ghouta and Douma, we only have very low number of physicians and medical staff who are able to handle those conditions. For example, we have physicians who are less than 20, handling more than 100,000 population. We have only 4 oxygen generators in Douma that can support those people. Our colleagues, I've been chatting with our colleagues also from the White Helmets, in addition to our staff, medical staff in Ghouta, and they've shared with us the reports on the casualties where they went to try to evacuate patients exposed to chemical weapons in the neighboring areas to the hospital. And they've seen, as you said, tens of people who died, who were already dead actually inside those basements. As they were trying to take shield from the constant barrel bombing that's taking place in Ghouta. So people were dead over there, and even our colleagues, our first responders, were not able to get into some of the basement because they don't have the tire to protect them. The smell and the concentration of chlorine was so significant that they themselves, some of them have some symptoms of respiratory distress, and they have to get out of that basement until it's safer, so they can go back in and evacuate those patients, whoever is left, or the people who died.
Ahmed,
and that's where the numbers are going up.
Ahmed, whenever we do reports like this, we have to be careful because we don't know for sure what has happened, because it's difficult to verify, of course, from a distance. But what you're hearing, is this on the basis of the previous experience that you guys have had with other attacks allegedly of this sort?
Right. So, as medical organization and medical facilities, we have many layers of reviewing the symptoms, the charts, the presentation, the response to the available medical treatments. And that's what's available inside Syria. We don't have labs to confirm, for example, the blood testing and urine samples. As a matter of fact, our physicians were saying, hey, listen, we are able to collect those samples. We want the international community to investigate those samples and tell us if these attacks are compatible with nerve gas or chemical weapons, let's call it that way. Let's confirm that and see where this is coming from. because clearly the high concentration of chlorine is coming from helicopters and air forces that are at that place. That has to be dropped from the sky. And certainly the casualties is so high to the point where it's an attack on civilians. It's not an attack on the front line. It's not an attack and clashes between arming sides. This is a war on civilians. And that's why our physicians, our first responders are asking that the international community take an action and investigate and review this. We all want this. We want to see what is happening. But having said that, Ghouta is one of the places that get frequently exposed to chemical attacks using chlorine and other chemical weapons that, time over time they prove to be very accurate and very precise. And SAMS and our partner organization, medical organization, have been reporting the attacks throughout Syria, and many of the international investigations confirmed those attacks to be accurate, including Khan Sheikhoun attack.
Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the news. The German authorities say a man who drove a van into people outside a restaurant in the city of Münster was a German citizen with no apparent links to terrorism. 2 people were killed and the driver shot himself dead. The German Chancellor Angela Merkel said she was deeply shocked and offered condolences. Defense officials in Afghanistan say they've killed a senior commander of the Islamic State group. They say a drone was used to target Kari Hekmat in the northern province of Jowzjan. He had defected from the Taliban to the Islamic State a year ago. A number of senior members of the extremist group have been killed in Afghanistan recently. Israel's army says it will investigate the death of a Palestinian journalist shot dead during the latest round of clashes between Palestinian protesters and Israeli forces on Gaza's border with Israel. The 30-year-old was one of 9 Palestinians killed on Friday. Today, Palestinian mourners in the Gaza Strip buried their dead. And the Vatican's police force has arrested a priest suspected of breaking child pornography laws. Monsignor Carlo Alberto Capella is being held in one of the Vatican cells. He was working at the Holy See's embassy in Washington until recently. American and Canadian officials started investigating the priest last year. And finally, opposition parties in Hungary are calling for a mass turnout and tactical voting in Sunday's parliamentary elections to prevent a 4th term in office for the Prime Minister Viktor Orban. Mr. Orban told his supporters that the poll was about keeping migrants out of Hungary. Opinion polls put the governing Fidesz party comfortably ahead. Now, the former Brazilian president Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has surrendered himself to police to begin a 12-year sentence for corruption. Lula is being taken from his hometown near São Paulo to a prison in the southern city of Curitiba. The former president insists that he is innocent. Lebo Disseco has more, and we should warn you that her report contains some flash photography from the beginning.
His supporters were far from happy, but Lula had promised he'd do it. More than 24 hours after the deadline had passed, Brazil's former president pushed through this crowd to hand himself in and start a 12-year prison sentence for corruption. Earlier, he'd addressed adoring crowds. By his side, his impeached successor as president, Dilma Rousseff.
I am doing a very conscious thing. I will go. I'm not going to run, and so they know I'm going to prove my innocence. They need to know that.
For his supporters, he was still a warrior of the people, imprisoned in order to stop him running for president in October, a poll he was favourite to win. But his opponents' voices have been just as loud. Outside federal police headquarters, some called him a thief who belongs in prison.
I came here just so I could see up close when this crooked man, Lula, goes to prison.
With police having to keep the pro and anti-Lula protesters apart, the high feelings outside this building perhaps mirror wider Brazilian society, divided between those who still believe Lula is the best thing to happen to their country and those who think he was one of the worst. Lebo Disseco, BBC News.
Firefighters have been tackling a blaze on the 50th floor of Trump Tower in New York. The city's fire department says 1 person has died and 4 firefighters have suffered minor injuries. The building serves as the headquarters for the Trump Organization. Now, Russia's ambassador to the UK has requested a meeting with the Foreign Secretary, Boris Johnson, to discuss last month's nerve agent attack in Salisbury. The Russian embassy in London says its relationship with the Foreign Office was utterly unsatisfactory. Moscow denies trying to poison its former spy, Sergei Skripal, and his daughter Yulia, who are both recovering in hospital. Here's our political correspondent, Alex Forsyth.
Well, look, the details of this invitation appeared on the Russian embassy's website today, and they said it was high time there was a meeting. They said the Russian ambassador had written a personal note to the Foreign Secretary with this invitation, and they hoped the UK would engage constructively. Now, this seems to be part of efforts by Russia to portray the British government as the ones who are being obstructive and uncooperative. Russian officials have already questioned the decision to deny a visa to the cousin of Yulia Skripal, Victoria, and to prevent consular access to the Skripals in hospital. Now, for its part, the Foreign Office has said it will consider this request and respond in due course, but it's dismissed all of this as diversionary tactics, an attempt to deflect from questions about the Russians' role in this attack. It has said that it is Russia whose response has been unsatisfactory. It is Russia that has failed to engage constructively. So while Sergei and Yulia Skripal, their condition is said to be improving, but diplomatic relations between Russia and the UK most certainly are not.
The Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, says the police officers should feel confident to stop and search anyone they suspect of carrying an offensive weapon. Mr. Khan emphasised his support for the targeted use of the tactic after more than 50 suspected murders in the city so far this year. An extra 300 officers are being deployed in areas of London worst affected by the violence. Simon Jones reports.
Lives lost, families grieving, some living in fear. And the growing question, what can be done to tackle violent crime? With calls for the police to make more use of controversial powers to stop and search suspects for weapons. The number of searches has fallen dramatically in recent years amid fears that poorer areas and ethnic minority groups were being disproportionately targeted.
Look, when stop and search is used properly, it's an invaluable tool to the police, and what we want is more targeted, intelligence-led stop and search. The game changer, as far as Londoners should be concerned, is we've had the biggest rollout in the world of body-worn cameras. But the advantage for members of the public is they should have the confidence that the police officer is recording the interaction between a police officer and a member of the public.
Hundreds of extra officers are on the streets of London this weekend, but some academics question whether using stop and search significantly reduces violent crime. The Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Cressida Dick, says she backs searches done in a way that is targeted and intelligence-led. In East London, there's some support.
This is the right time to do it. Seen too many kills.
People could feel targeted as well, that, why am I being stopped rather than me or this guy or this woman or so on and so forth.
Let them stop me and search me. Let them stop even the girls, because the girls are also in the gangs.
Here in Hackney, flowers mark the spot where 18-year-old Israel Ogunshola lost his life this week. He was stabbed to death. Many here say they've had enough. They want an end to the violence, but there's recognition there may be no simple, quick fix. One former chief superintendent with the Met says much more needs to be done to prevent young people carrying weapons in the first place.
I think we need to be doing much more in schools, and certainly when I've spoken to parents of children who've been murdered, one thing they say, all of them, without exception, is that they want to see much more intervention at an earlier stage in schools.
As the grieving continues, the Mayor of London has invited the Home Secretary and all London's MPs to a knife crime summit next week to discuss what else can be done in the fight against violence that is ruining so many lives. Simon Jones, BBC News.
Tributes have been paid to the 15 people killed after a bus carrying a junior ice hockey team crashed in Canada. More than a dozen other passengers were injured when the vehicle collided with a truck in the province of Saskatchewan. Our North America correspondent Chris Buckler reports.
In hospital, teammates are turning to each other for support, all too aware that many of those they played alongside have been killed.
18 seconds to go on this Humboldt power play.
In Canada, ice hockey is a sport that unites. And in Humboldt, a community of just 6,000 people, their team, the Broncos, aren't just seen as stars, but as sons and neighbours.
The worst nightmare has happened. As a league, we will support the Humboldt Broncos every way possible.
The players, many of them teenagers, were on their way to a playoff match in a nearby town when the bus they were on collided with a lorry. Instead of going to watch that Junior League game, their families spent the night together in a church hall, hoping for information and fearing what it might be.
Take that time to recognize all of our young men and our coaching staff and everybody who's been involved in this tragedy.
On Twitter, the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said, "I cannot imagine what these parents are going through, and my heart goes out to everyone affected by this terrible tragedy." The Humboldt Broncos were due to play another game this weekend. Instead, their stadium will play host to a vigil for a team torn apart as they travel together. Chris Buckler, BBC News.
This is BBC News, and these are the headlines. American officials say they believe at least 40 people have been killed in what appears to be a chemical weapons attack in Syria. Brazil's former president, Lula, has ended a 2-day standoff and surrendered to police to begin a 12-year sentence for corruption. And let's get more on our main story, because Kenan Rahmani is an advocacy campaigner with the Syrian Campaign, and an organization closely working with the White Helmets. Thank you so much for joining us, Kenan. First of all, what have your colleagues on the ground been telling you?
Well, today has been an absolutely horrific day in Douma, the largest town in eastern Ghouta. There has been roughly 36 hours of continuous bombardment on this small besieged pocket in the suburbs of Damascus. And amidst that bombardment, there was one barrel bomb which was dropped by Assad regime aircraft, which contained chemicals which quickly poisoned at first 6 patients who were taken to the nearby clinic, and then there was an additional 36 who were discovered dead. Entire families were completely killed from this poison gas. The poison gas reflects the symptoms that we saw in the sarin gas attacks in Khan Sheikhoun last year and in the eastern Ghouta area in 2013. Symptoms such as pinpoint pupils, foaming at the mouth, in addition to nervous system complications. So this seems to be something of a nerve agent, either sarin or VX, or maybe another kind of nerve agent. And so far we have 42 civilians who have been confirmed dead. However, it's feared that there are many more who are still stuck in their homes. Many of these civilians who were killed were women and children who were hiding in the underground shelters. And because the air is lighter than the gas, or rather the gas is heavier than the air, the gas sunk into the underground shelters, killing those women and children who were hiding from the bombs.
Kenan, I don't know whether you've had a chance to see some of the images which we've been getting. I mean, of course, we have to stress that these images have not been independently verified, but we have been getting them in. Of course, I think perhaps we have to treat this with caution. This is, what you're telling us now is based on the symptoms and the way people are reacting, and from your past experience. But none of these things have yet been tested, for example, in a lab. Is that correct?
No, these have not been tested in laboratories, obviously, but there's no explanation other than chemical weapons for the kinds of symptoms that we're seeing in such a large number of patients. There's really no other explanation.
What kind of support have you been able to give people? Because this is a difficult situation to deal with, because it is not conventional, in a sense, warfare, is it?
No, absolutely not. I mean, this is it's a completely horrific situation. People are describing it like doomsday, or they feel that it's the end of the world for them. People's entire families have been killed in a single poison gas attack. And, you know, the white helmet teams are there on the ground. They're trying to evacuate people. There are medics. Syrian American Medical Society has its teams on the ground. They're trying to do their best to help those that can be helped. But unfortunately, many of those who are dead were killed. They didn't even have enough time to be able to move from their place and get out and get to fresh air. That again is a strong sign that this is a nerve agent of some kind. But the teams are on the ground. But the problem is that the Assad regime and the Russian Air Force continue to bomb the same area that was in which the chemical weapons were used. So even rescue teams and medics are unable to reach the areas to reach the victims. And on top of that, today the major hospital in Douma, which the Russians and the Assad regime are aware of the coordinates of the hospital for deconfliction purposes, that hospital is targeted, further limiting the ability of medics to respond to the chemical attack. So it's absolutely horrific, and these war crimes must be held to account. Otherwise, these kinds of crimes will continue with impunity.
Of course, many have said that the event in Syria should be subject to potential war crimes prosecutions. I just want to ask you, because should this be verified and confirmed, this would not be the first time that chemical weapons have been used in Syria. For organizations such as yours, do you prepare for the potential of something like this happening, or do you just kind of sit and hope that it doesn't happen again?
I mean, of course, we always hope that the chemical warfare of the Assad regime will stop. We hope that all use of barrel bombs, the use of torture, we hope all of these weapons that are being used against civilians stop immediately. But unfortunately, we've become accustomed to the Assad regime and its enablers, the Russian and Iranian governments, continuing to be intransigent and continuing to violate all norms of human rights, of warfare. And so we're always prepared for these kinds of scenarios. And we just ask ourselves, how many more Syrians have to be killed? How many more chemical attacks have to happen before the world comes together and acknowledges its responsibility in protecting these innocent civilians who are being killed, and stops this horrific atrocity once and for all?
Okay, thank you very much. That's Kenna Rahmani, advocacy campaigner with the Syria campaign, which works closely with the White Helmets who are on the ground there in Syria. Thank you for joining us. Now let's get more now on the vehicle attack in Germany, and officials say that there's no evidence that the man who drove into a packed restaurant had any Islamist links. Our Berlin correspondent Jenny Hill sent this report.
In the historic heart of an old university city, a scene of horror. The square was busy, people enjoying the spring sunshine, when a van ploughed through what's usually a pedestrian zone. For those in its path, little chance to escape. The pavement cafe was full of people, eating, drinking, relaxing.
It was a small restaurant, and the people are sitting outside, and then the van crashed in the restaurant.
And still we don't know why. The driver, police say, killed himself in the van after the crash.
The suspect shot himself in the vehicle. His identity is still unclear.
But they've yet to formally establish a motive. Earlier they raided an apartment believed to be the man's home. He's said to be a German citizen who's known to the police, a man in his late 40s with mental health problems.
The perpetrator, who at around 3 p.m. ploughed into a group of people, was a German citizen and not, as it was reported, a refugee or something similar. The details are being thoroughly examined. Because of that, we can't go into further details. There is nothing to say at the moment that there was any Islamist background, but we must wait and see.
Tonight, those investigations continue in a city now mourning its dead and praying for those left fighting for life. Jenny Hill, BBC News.
The Bollywood star Salman Khan has been released from jail after being granted bail by an Indian court. The 52-year-old actor has now arrived home in Mumbai and waved at huge crowds from his balcony. The Indian actor was sentenced to 5 years in prison on Thursday after being found guilty of killing 2 rare black buck antelopes 20 years ago. Under the terms of his bail, Salman Khan has been ordered to pay around $700 and will not be able to leave India without the court's permission. Our correspondent Nitin Srivastava was outside the court in Jodhpur.
There's been a sense of huge jubilation. Firecrackers have been burst outside the court premises by hundreds of fans of the Bollywood superstar Salman Khan. Ever since the news of him being granted bail came out of the court premises. This is the Sessions Court where the hearing has been on since the morning. The local authorities did not allow the superstar to come and attend the hearing in person because they fear that it could become a law and order problem. As you can see right behind me, there are hundreds of fans, huge media presence out here to have a glimpse of the superstar's family which had come for the court hearing. This may be a temporary respite for Salman Khan, who is one of India's top superstars, but this surely is not a full respite because the case is still on and the hearing is set to resume very soon. Nitin Srivastava, BBC News, Jodhpur, India.
And just a reminder that you can get in touch with me and most of the team on Twitter. I do occasionally tweet interesting stuff. You can find me at Nkam Ifejika. And let's get the weather now with Nick Miller.